and state governments. Donations made to the National Children's Fund will now be eligible for 100% deduction. No large economy can become truly developed without a robust manufacturing sector. Hence, as stated in Part A of my speech, I propose to provide an investment allowance at the rate of 15% to a manufacturing company that invests more than 100 crore rupees in plant and machinery during the period 1/4/2013 to 31/3/2015. I propose to extend the eligible date for projects in the power sector to avail of the benefit under Section 80IA of the Income Tax Act from 31/3/2013 to 31/3/2014. In order to encourage repatriation of funds from overseas companies, I propose to continue for one more year the concessional rate of tax of 15% on dividend received by an Indian company from its foreign subsidiary. Further, the Indian company shall not be liable to pay dividend distribution tax on the distribution to its shareholders of that portion of the income received from its foreign subsidiary. With a view to attract investment in long-term infrastructure bonds in foreign currency, the rate of tax on interest paid to non-resident investors was reduced last year from 20% to 5%. I propose to extend the same benefit to investment made through a designated bank account in rupee-denominated long-term infrastructure bonds. In order to facilitate financial institutions to securitize their assets through a special purpose vehicle, I propose to exempt the securitization trust from income tax. Tax shall be levied only at the time of distribution of income by the securitization trust at the rate of 30% in the case of companies and the rate of 25% in the case of an individual or HUF. No further tax will be levied on income received by the investors from the securitization trust. Investor Protection Fund set up by a depository for the protection of interest of beneficial owners will be exempt from income tax. I propose to provide parity in taxation between an IDF mutual fund that distributes income and an IDF NBFC that pays interest when the payment is made to a non-resident. The rate of tax on such distributed income or interest will be 5%. Venture capital funds have been allowed pass-through status under the Income Tax Act. The relevant regulations of SEBI have been replaced by alternative investment fund regulations. Hence, I propose to extend, subject to certain conditions, pass-through status to Category 1 alternative investment funds registered with SEBI as venture capital funds. Angel investors who are recognized as Category 1 AIF venture capital funds will also get pass-through status. I propose to modify the Rajiv Gandhi Equity Savings Scheme, details which I had mentioned in Part A of my speech. Transactions on immovable properties are usually undervalued and underreported. One half of the transactions do not carry the PAN of the parties concerned. With a view to improving the reporting of such transactions and the taxation of capital gains, I propose to apply TDS at the rate of 1% on the value of the transfer of immovable property where the consideration exceeds rupees 50 lakhs. However, agricultural land will be exempt. Some tax avoidance arrangements have come to notice, and I propose to plug the loopholes. Some unlisted companies have avoided dividend distribution tax by arrangements involving buyback of shares. I propose to levy a final withholding tax at the rate of 20% on profits distributed by unlisted companies to shareholders through buyback of shares. Another case is the distribution of profits by a subsidiary to a foreign parent company in the form of royalty. Besides, the rate of tax on royalty in the Income Tax Act is lower than the rates provided in a number of double tax avoidance agreements. This is an anomaly that must be corrected. Hence, I propose to increase the rate of tax on payments by way of royalty and fees for technical services to non-residents from 10% to 25%. However, the applicable rate will be the rate of tax stipulated in the DTAA. Securitizations Transaction Tax, STT, has a stabilizing effect on transactions, although it adds to the transaction cost. Taking note of the changes and shifts in the market, I propose to make the following reductions in the rates of tax. Equity future from 0.017 to 0.01%. Mutual fund ETF redemptions at fund counters from 0.25 to 0.001%. Mutual fund ETF purchase or sale on exchanges from 0.1 to 0.001%, but only on the seller. There is no distinction between derivative trading in the securities market and derivative trading in the commodities market. Only the underlying asset is different. It is time to introduce commodities transaction tax in a limited way. Hence, I propose to levy CTT on non-agricultural commodities futures contracts at the same rate as on equity futures, that is at 0.01% of the price of the trade. Trading in commodity derivatives will not be considered as a speculative transaction, and CTT shall be allowed as deduction if the income from such transaction forms part of the business income. As I said, agricultural commodities will be exempt. Honorable members are aware that the Finance Act 2012 introduced the General Anti-Avoidance Rules, for short GAR. A number of representations were received against the new provisions. An expert committee was constituted to consult stakeholders and finalize the GAR guidelines. After careful consideration of the report, government announced certain decisions on 14/1/2013, which were widely welcomed. I propose to incorporate those decisions in the Income Tax Act. The modified provisions preserve the basic thrust and purpose of GAR. Impermissible tax avoidance arrangements will be subjected to tax after a determination is made through a well-laid out procedure involving an assessing officer and an approving panel headed by a judge. I propose to bring the modified provisions into effect from 1/4/2016. The Rangachari Committee was appointed to look into tax matters relating to development centers and IT sector and safe harbor rules for a number of sectors. We have issued a circular covering IT sector exports and will shortly issue a circular covering development centers. Rules on safe harbor will be issued after examining the reports of the committee, the last of which is expected by 31/3/2013. The fifth large taxpayer unit will be opened at Kolkata shortly. I have also taken a number of administrative measures in the last few months. I propose to expand the scope of annual information returns, extend e-payment facility through more banks, extend the refund banker system to refunds of more than rupees 50,000, and make e-filing mandatory for more categories of SSCs. The Income Tax Department is rapidly moving towards technology-based processing, as would be evident from the Central Processing Cell set up at Bengaluru and the Central Processing Cell TDS inaugurated a few days ago at Vaishali, Ghaziabad. The Direct Taxes Code is work in progress. The DTC is not intended to be an amended version of the Income Tax Act 1961, but a new code based on the best international practices that will be compatible with the needs of a fast-developing economy. The Standing Committee on Finance has submitted its report, and we attach great weight to its recommendations. My team in the Ministry of Finance is examining the recommendations, and I intend to work with the Standing Committee and its chairman in order to finalize the official amendments. I shall endeavor to bring the bill back to this House before the end of the budget session. I shall now deal with indirect taxes. There will be no change in the peak rate of basic customs duty of 10% for non-agricultural products. There will also be no change in the normal rate of excise duty of 12% and the normal rate of service tax of 12%. I have a few proposals on customs duties. To encourage manufacture of environment-friendly vehicles, I propose to extend the period of concession now available for specified parts of electric and hybrid vehicles up to 31/3/2015. Leather and leather goods is a thrust sector for exports. I propose to reduce the duty on specified machinery for manufacture of leather and leather goods, including footwear, from 7.5% to 5%. To encourage exports, I propose to reduce the duty on preforms of precious and semi-precious stones from 10% to 2%. Export duty on de-oiled rice bran oil cake has made our exports uncompetitive. Hence, I propose to withdraw the said duty. Prices of unprocessed ilmenite have gone up several-fold in the export market. Considering the need to conserve our natural resources, I propose to impose a duty of 10% on export of unprocessed ilmenite and 5% on export of upgraded ilmenite. The aircraft manufacture, repair and overall MRO industry is at a nascent stage. Encouraging the MRO sector will generate employment besides other benefits. Hence, I propose to provide certain concessions to the MRO industry, details of which are in the budget documents. To encourage domestic production of set-top boxes as well as value addition, I propose to increase the import duty from 5% to 10%. In order to give a measure of protection to domestic sericulture, I propose to increase the import duty on raw silk from 5% to 15%. Steam coal is exempt from customs duty, but attracts a concessional CVD of 1%. Bituminous coal attracts a duty of 5% and CVD of 6%. Since both kinds of coal are used in thermal power stations, there is rampant misclassification. I propose to equalize the duties on both kinds of coal and levy 2% customs duty and 2% CVD. There is an affluent class in India that consumes imported luxury goods such as high-end motor vehicles, motorcycles, yachts, and similar vessels. I'm sure they will not mind paying a little more. Hence, I propose to increase the duty on such motor vehicles from 75% to 100%, on motorcycles with engine capacity of 800 cc or more from 60% to 75%, and on yachts and similar vessels from 10% to 25%. Madam, the baggage rules permitting eligible passengers to bring jewelry was last amended in 1991. Gold prices have risen since, and passengers have complained of harassment. Hence, I propose to raise the duty-free limit to rupees 50,000 in the case of a male passenger and rupees 1 lakh in the case of a female passenger, subject to the usual conditions. Next, I shall deal with excise duties. The ready-made garment industry is in the throes of a crisis. The industry needs a lifeline. The industry needs a lifeline. There is a demand to restore the zero excise duty route for cotton and man-made sector spun yarn at the yarn, fabric and garment stages. I propose to accept the demand. In the case of cotton, there will be zero duty at the fiber stage also, and in the case of spun yarn, there will be a duty of 12% at the fiber stage. The zero excise duty route will be in addition to the SENVAT route now available. I propose to totally exempt handmade carpets and textile floor coverings of coir or jute from excise duty. As a measure of relief to the shipbuilding industry, I propose to exempt ships and vessels from excise duty. Consequently, there will be no CVD on imported ships and vessels. What does the finance minister turn to when he requires resources? The answer is cigarettes. I propose to increase a specific excise duty on cigarettes by about 18%. Similar increases are proposed on cigars, cheroots, and cigarillos. SUVs occupy greater road and parking space and ought to bear a higher tax. I propose to increase the excise duty on SUVs from 27% to 30%. However, the increase will not apply to SUVs